Food I remember from the 50's. Fish were prepared in the cold scullery on the marble slab. Living in the fishing village of Senin had its benefits, and fresh fish was a cheap and nutritious food that was relished, often straight off the boats. The local fishermen would hawk their wares door to door, especially for regular customers. Soused mackerel, marinated or pickled in vinegar and spices, was popular, but more often mackerel just fried in butter was a very quick and tasty option. As Brenda explained in her song Thunder and Lightning, "Now take a mackerel out the sea, oh souse it they all say. My cock just puttin' in the pan and fryin' straight away." If money was tight and the fish weren't biting, perhaps it would be the salty toe rag, dried salt cod that needed soaking at least overnight to withdraw as much of the salt as possible. My favourite was a wing of ray, a sweet bitter fish, boiled taties and butter to make a rich dish, and with the added bonus of the white meat being easily removed from the bones. If Angus and I had been on a recent winkling expedition, there'd be a saucer of boiled winkles with a little vinegar and salt, and a slice of thin bread and butter, and a pin, of course. Meat was usually a bit more expensive, but if they were feeling flush, under roast was always popular, and raw fry as well. Cornish recipes which can be found in many good regional cookbooks. Cheaper cuts prevailed. Angus's favourite was pig's trotters. John favoured tripe. Pasties were also an economical and, of course, much-loved meal, although very labour-intensive. The best meat for pasties is the cheaper cut of marbled skirt, as it makes for a juicier filling, and Brenda often used flaky pastry. Lena taught Brenda well, and we always looked forward to pasty day. In fact, Brenda always said you had to let the family know in the morning if you were making pasties that day, as the anticipation was part of the enjoyment. Each person's pasty would be marked with their initial on one corner in pastry, so if you couldn't eat it all at one go, as was usually the case, the saved corner would still be identifiable later. This poem she wrote many years later. P is for the pastry, not too rich to start. A's the way you make it, for it truly is an art. S is for the skirt beef, which provides the handsome juice. T is for the turnip, so tender, rich and loose. Y is you who eat it, the best meal in the world. I salute the Cornish pasty, under Cornish flag unfurled. The essential drink to accompany a pasty, by the way, is always a cup of hot sweet tea. While we're on pasties, I must just mention a chap from over Newlyn, as told to me by Angus. Joe Perry had a hare lip, and consequently a bit of a speech impediment. His missus made him a pasty for his dinner every single day. But one day he was horrified to come home to find she'd decided to ring the changes and made him stew. "No," he cried, "I don't want no bloody new. Pasties I work for, and pasties I shall have." Oh, and not forgetting the poor widower Brenda met, forced to make his own pasties once his wife had gone, trying to close his pasty with safety pins, because he couldn't manage the crimping properly. Any leftover pastry was filled with jam and made into a jam pasty for pudding. Other artery-clogging desserts we often enjoyed. Cheap and filling steamed puddings, like spotted dick with custard, Yorkshire puddings with treacle, or treacle tart, blackberry and fruit tarts, of course, or maybe junket with Cornish clotted cream, which she sometimes made herself, a long but rewarding process which involved scalding the milk in a wide, shallow pan and eventually skimming off the thick, luscious cream. Brenda also made excellent homemade lemonade from a recipe of Lena's. Any sudden glut of fruit or vegetables was always put to good use, pickled or made into jams, fruit tarts or chutneys, and glass jars were never thrown away. The WI provided invaluable information for impoverished housewives on pickling, bottling and preserving. No fridges or freezers or plastic in those days. And every year without fail, come September would be the blackberrying. We'd all go out searching, and having found a likely picking ground, usually field hedges, country lanes or cliff tops, we'd each choose our own spot and cootie down and guard it jealously while we picked it clean, with the warning call, "Cootie cootie io, anybody come round here get a black io?" Years later she wrote a poem, serious for once, about blackberry picking at Lamorna, which began, "Last September we lined the willow basket with rusty curled bracken. Filled it to the brim with the best berries. No scruff. Cootie cootie io." No fast foods or heavily processed foods then. We collected fresh wild watercress from clear, clean streams, wild mushrooms from the fields, eggs came from a local farm, and Brenda and John grew what they could in the wind-battered garden. They even had a go at homemade wines. Gorse, elderflower and parsnip, I remember. All in all, I think our diet was pretty healthy. When Father was working nights at Skewjack, Brenda would sometimes suggest our special treat tea. Egg banjos followed by banana sandwiches. This was our fast food. An egg banjo is basically a fried egg sandwich, and I suspect it had more to do with Brenda not wanting to get involved in major cooking, but to me it was our snuggling in front of the fire secret comfort food. I don't remember Brenda making much saffron cake, possibly because saffron itself is devilishly expensive, although Lena did from time to time. But Evie cake was a staple, made with plain, not self-raising flour. And the ultimate wicked sweet treat was, of course, thunder and lightning, a thick slice of fresh bread drizzled with treacle, actually golden syrup, which makes the bread slightly crispy. Although many will argue the cream should go on first, it's personal choice, really, and smothered in a thick coating of clotted cream. Apart from cooking, Brenda found plenty down at Land's End to keep her busy. Her first adult attempt to oil painting, a hobby she enjoyed all her life, was made at Treve Moor. Unsurprising, given that both her father and brother were artists. It was obviously in the blood. Brenda and John took full advantage of the wonderful countryside, the cliffs and the beaches, and walks and picnics happened whenever possible, which at least counted the nutritious eating somewhat. The picnics often took on something of an epic quality. As well as all the food and drink, fizzy lemonade tablets and bottles of water, and the usual paraphernalia, rugs, umbrellas, beach gear, There was often Brenda's paint box, easel, boards and brushes as well. She loved to paint en plein air, outdoors, and many of these early paintings made it onto the wall in her front room, which became a gallery of happy events that I still keep up on my front room wall today, each one a fond memory of a blissful childhood outing. After the Annus Horribilis of 1994, when both Brenda and John died, I discovered on clearing the paintings from the wall that years after the event, she'd written a short paragraph on the back of each one of those picnic paintings, describing the day, what the weather had been like, anything of interest that had happened. One such was a painting of an old barn on Cerrow Farm at the foot of Chapel Cambrai, near Land's End Airfield at St Just. Not sure how we managed to access the site to drag the picnic there, but I remember the day, as a big old sow ambled up to watch her while she worked and tried to eat the paints. You remember things like that. The barn is still there, unchanged, and I see it regularly. Her paintings done in the 50s and 60s have a natural quality that I love. Like Angus, her style was impressionist, and her particular interests were sun on granite walls and old barns. She loved the warmth and solidity, the history they held. This was her comment about her first adult painting of a gateway at Treve Moor. My first adult painting all around Treve Moor was dry stone walling. The sun would set through the stones. We could hear the rocket of longships sounding through the fog. The winds could reach 130 miles per hour. Oil lamps, cook on the slab, carry water. We were very happy here. In those days we never had a car, and John rode to work on his old motorbike, which, as it did have a sidecar, at least meant that me and the picnic gear could be carried short distances, with Brenda riding pillion. As the years passed, she became very involved with the local community. Village activities she says she was active in include church, chapel, WI, council, drama, life-saving and bed and breakfast. At Christmas time, we joined forces with others and walked around the farmsteads for miles around, carol singing, usually fundraising for the Senin Drama Group or some other local cause. Electricity didn't come to Senin until 1933, and streetlights were still few and far between in the 1950s, so the locals were used to traipsing around in the dark. But John made improvised candle lanterns out of tin cans on bamboo poles for everyone to carry, which served the purpose admirably. In 1954, I started at Senin School, a wonderful establishment that thrives today. Then the headmistress lived on site, and there were just 2 classes, with playgrounds and a large playing field at the back. My favourite memory of the school, the nature table, and nature rambles down the country lane, and Brer Rabbit reading books. My least favourite, sports day and the egg and spoon and sack races. Oh, and the pickled adder in a jar. Useful, though, to know what to avoid on the country walks. Always stamp heavily walking along cliff paths. Scares them off. Beside the school, the old flooded quarry, still there today, was a favourite spot for tadpole hunts. As I was nearly 5 at that first term, I was one of the older children in that class, and by the following year, as a precocious reader, I'd been moved up a year, though I was not precocious at sums. At my first school medical, it was recognised that I had some health problems, and before too long I was diagnosed with what was then called a hole in the heart. Normally such problems are detected at birth, as the newborn is a blue baby, but apparently I was not sufficiently blue for anyone to notice. It was actually a hole in the aorta, the main valve leading into the heart, which meant that half of my blood was not being reoxygenated. I needed a specialist heart operation, and at the time Brenda and John were told that the nearest specialist was in London, that I might have to wait for 2 years, and the chances of a successful outcome were 50-50. But without the operation, I was unlikely to make it past my teens. This was a very traumatic time for them. Not me so much, as I had no idea of the gravity of the situation and was little affected at the time. The main issue being I got out of breath and tired easily. Still do, I'm obviously in my second childhood. Eventually they were told a specialist surgeon had moved to Bristol and there would be a 6-month wait. Then a specialist moved to Cornwall, and within short order, at age 6, I was sent to the delightfully placed Tehiddy Hospital in Camborne, long since closed. The operation, the first of its kind in the West Country, was a great success. Obviously, as I write this over 60 years later, and the recovery period was 6 weeks. Needless to say, I have ever since been thankful for my reprieve, for the skill of the surgeons and nurses, and for the blessing of the NHS. Long may it survive against the current outrageous odds. I had a great time. My chief memory of the whole event was that I got lots of nice presents, and the only unpleasant bit was having the stitches out and getting my kit off in front of the doctor at my annual checkups as I approached puberty. With great consideration for young girls, they entered the chest cavity at the side rather than down the centre front, which was apparently the preferred option for boys. So I acquired an impressive scar running around the shoulder blade down to right under the arm, with no embarrassing impact on my future décolletage. It was many years later that Brenda told me she'd had several miscarriages while living at Sennin. At least 3, I believe. She told me 5. Father later remembered only 3. But then he wasn't experiencing them. This certainly contributed to her weight gain. Apparently her stomach muscles had collapsed when I was born, and she was unable to maintain a pregnancy after that, although she kept trying. On one of these occasions, all of which I was blissfully unaware of at the time, while I was in Tehiddy recovering from my heart operation, Father set out from Sennin on his motorbike and sidecar to visit both me in Tehiddy and Brenda in Treliske hospitals following yet another miscarriage, and came off his bike at Burius Bridge, which then had a low stone wall beside a narrowing of the road over the stream. He ended up in West Cornwall Hospital with a smashed ankle. So all 3 of us were in different Cornish hospitals at the same time. God bless the NHS. Around this time, I was appointed Fairy Queen at Sennin Carnival, a huge honour. My Fairy King was Ronald Angove, the son of milkman Josie Angove. I've always suspected that my royal appointment was the result of a sympathy vote.